Hey everybody, it's Brox here. I am going to go over a variant Bouldercane build style that was brought up to me via Woody's Discord by a gentleman or female named Huhu, H-U-H-U, who had seen my previous Bouldercane video where we were using Earth and Might to proc boulders into Hurricane. And he had sent me or he or she sent me a template for a Nature's Fury version. And when we were looking at Nature's Fury for it, a bunch of questions kind of started popping up, which was how are we going to get certain components to kind of operate and work the way that would be needed to kind of make it sustainable. This went on all night. It is 6:30 in the morning, so if I stumble through this, I do apologize. I have not slept. We kind of were going at this back and forth for the last couple hours. So I wanted to kind of bring you the resolution to where we think we're really, really good now, having solved most of the problems. Again, these are all theory crafts until the new patch drops and the new season starts, because we don't know how all of this is going to work. I mean, some of the things on the build planner don't even have affixes to kind of make sure that you're not going to just straight up die. But I think we've solved a lot of problems with this. I actually do think this Bouldercane version is probably better than my template Earth and Might version, because again, that was a very early theory crafting template. This one's a lot more solved, a lot more deep dived from the hours we just kind of put into this. This is probably going to be a little bit longer of a video, so I do ask that you kind of bear with me. There's a lot to kind of cover to make this all kind of make sense. So right from the top, we're just going to kind of run through the gear. And I'm going to try to explain this the best I can, because again, there's a lot of involved stuff that actually is going on with this. So first thing first, we're going to go with Vasili's Prayer. There are 4 different uniques that are going to make up this build. All of them are pretty much required except for maybe Flicker Step. And then one legendary aspect that is required. But all of this is not a starter build. This is definitely a late game build. This is going to require some farming to get online and to get these uniques that would bring this together. But from the top, we're going with the unique Vasili's Prayer. This is going to turn our earth skills into werebear skills, and it's going to fortify us. The reason for this is actually really important. Is we dropped from my Earth and Might build, we dropped the Ring of Starless Skies because that's an uber unique, so it's extremely hard to get to help bring down spirit cost reduction. The trade-off on that is to bring Boulder's hefty spirit cost from 50 down. We need a way to do heavy spirit cost reduction, and the way we're going to do that is through the Paragon board, and we're going to be using the I believe it's the Inner Beast tree. Yes, the Inner Beast tree. So the Inner Beast legendary node, which says after shape-shifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 10% for 5 seconds up to 30%. So we're going to try to always keep this at 30%. So as we're casting boulders, there's a 30% reduction on the mana requirement for boulder. And that's why we're converting this to a werebear skill, so that when we go back and forth with Storm Strike, or Wind Shear, this could be 2, I'll go over that in a second, but Storm Strike or Wind Shear is to make us switch in and out of werebear form, so that we can keep up that spirit cost reduction, and we can keep casting boulders at a reduced cost rate. So then we're going to take aspect of disobedience on our chest armor. This to me can be swappable. It depends where you're taking too much damage from. If you're taking too much damage from physical attacks, then obviously disobedience is really good. Disobedience can have downtime, so that's kind of something you have to be careful with, especially if you're running later nightmare dungeons, but it is very effective for physical resistance and armor. The alternative to this would be something like Aspect of Might, which gives you pure damage reduction. I'll just show that to you guys real quick. So Aspect of Might, basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for up to 6 seconds. And obviously, since we're going to be going in and out with Storm Strike or Wind Shear, that would be up all the time. So if you prefer to have flat damage reduction, you can switch this to Aspect of the Might. Or if you want the physical damage reduction, you can keep Aspect of the Disobedience. Either option is fine here. We're going to take Symbiotic Aspect, which means when our Nature's Fury key passive triggers a free skill, our non-ultimate cooldowns of the opposite type are reduced by up to 5 seconds. This is crucial, and this aspect has always been super good. This aspect is insane. But basically, as Boulder, if it procs Nature's Fury, it's going to reduce the cooldown of Hurricane, and it's going to reduce it by up to 5. You know, if you have it 5 seconds, that's a 5-second reduction every time Nature's Fury procs, which has a 30% proc rate, right? So every Boulder that hits, and we're going to have multiple Boulders out at once, you know, theoretically, almost every 3 hits, every 3 Boulders that hit should proc, and that would proc down Hurricane, which allows us to ensure that we're going to have 100% uptime on Hurricane by the time the cooldown, the duration expires. The cooldown should already be gone. That's crucial and important. So Symbiotic is very, very important to this build to keep Hurricane always online. So then we have Tybalt's Will. This is another kind of mandatory. Pretty much every unique on this is pretty much mandatory. So what this says is you deal 40% increased damage while unstoppable, and for 4 seconds after. When you become unstoppable, you gain 50 of your primary resource. So every form of unstoppable that we can proc, then we get 50 primary resource, which, as you would know, is the exact amount of resource we need to cast Boulder. So every time we can proc Unstoppable, we can proc a Boulder, and with our spirit cost reduction from the Paragon board, we can actually get out quite a few more Boulders than just 1 per Unstoppable. And that is going to be triggered by Metamorphosis. So every time we evade, we get Unstoppable, and so every time we evade, we get 50 primary resource. This is going to negate the need to constantly be spamming basic attacks, which is great for people who hate basic attacks. You could almost run this build without ever casting basic attacks if you wanted to. But you do need to, you know, from time to time swap in and out so that you keep your spirit cost reduction up from the Paragon nodes. But you could get away with doing quite a bit without having to go through that reduction in the time period that it's up. Then we're going to take Flicker Step. Flicker Step, each time we evade through enemies, reduces the ultimate cooldown by up to 4 seconds, or 4 seconds up to 10 seconds. So essentially, while we're going to Metamorphosis and through mobs, then we're also going to be reducing Petrify's cooldown. And depending on how many mobs we can actually petrify to, this would be 10-second chunks at a time per evade. So this helps get our petrify back very quickly. We're also obviously going to take the combination of Prey on the Weak with Metamorphosis, because that also means every time that we evade through enemies, they're also going to become vulnerable during the after the evade goes through. So the combination here is very, very strong because we're going to gain Unstoppable. That's going to give us primary spirit. It's also going to make enemies vulnerable, and it's also going to reduce the cooldown on Petrify for each evade that we do. To quickly also run through, we're going to take Anticipation, of course, so that we can reduce our ultimate skill cooldown by 20%, and then our ultimate skills gain 12% increased damage for each nearby enemy affected by damage over time effects. We're not really doing any damage over time effects outside of Poison Creeper when we do proc it, so we can gain that benefit, but it's kind of marginal. The real factor here is the 20% cooldown reduction, so that this is also reduced by 20%. For the others that we're going to take here, we're going to take Sanguine, hopefully I'm saying that right, Sanguine Brace, and it's when you kill an enemy, you fortify for 6% of your base life. When you have more fortify than half your maximum life, you gain 8% critical strike chance. So this is just super nice. It's a nice defensive way to keep fortify. We're going to be killing a lot of enemies. It's Diablo. So that's going to help us keep our fortify topped off, and then of course at over half we're getting that 8% critical strike chance. Then I have a preference for this. We had some discussions about doing some other options besides this. I just really like this buff. It's 10 seconds long and it gives you 15% move speed, and it can give you up to 20% attack speed. So if we can weave this in with Storm Strike or Wind Shear just to get the buff for 10 seconds, it's just a really nice buff to have. So I'm going to keep it here for now. There are some other options that were discussed. I think the big one was Domination, which was you deal 24% increased damage to enemies who are stunned, immobilized, frozen, or feared. If they're injured and not an elite, they instantly die. This just helps, quickly remove trash mobs in dungeons, and it's just more efficient to speed up kind of your dungeon runs. But I don't know if that efficiency is going to make up for losing 15% move speed pretty much the entire time that you're in the dungeon. I think moving faster at the end of the day and attacking faster at the end of the day is probably going to inch out ahead of Domination. So like I said, I'm going to leave it here. It's kind of an involved thing that you have to kind of monitor and keep up. But I think once you get the kind of rhythm of the play style that this requires, I think you'll have it up all the time. Alright, so then for the weapon, of course, we're going to take Metamorphic Stone. This is kind of required. This is going to turn Boulder into a core skill, and then it costs 50 spirit, and it raises the normal damage rate by 240% because the 120% gets doubled on a two-hander. So that would be 240%, which brings Boulder's base damage up to around, I think it's like 204 or 205%. And that's a little confusing. I hopefully am understanding this. I haven't play tested this. Again, this is all theorycraft, but my understanding of how this actually works for the people who are confused by that is Boulder 5 out of 5 has a base damage rate of 60%. And this is saying that it is dealing 240% of the normal damage. So if the normal damage is 60% of the weapon damage, this 240% would be 240% times 60%. So that's how we're getting to that 204, 205% rate. Again, is that 100% correct? I'm not entirely sure. I haven't tested it to verify. I'm just reading it and interpreting how I think it works. I'm open to clarifications if that's wrong. Then, of course, we have Dolmen Stone. This is required. This is going to make casting Boulder, while you have Hurricane, cause Boulder to orbit around you in a circle. And from the fact that there's no cap number on this, we're under the assumption that you can cast as many boulders as you can for the duration of Hurricane. So Hurricane should roughly be up around 11 to 12 seconds. It's how many boulders can you throw out in 11 and 12 seconds that you can have orbiting you. Our goal is 9+ with this build that we were calculating that you should be able to get at least 9, possibly more than 9 out within that 11 to 12 second time frame. What's also cool, this is not an aspect I see on many builds, but I think this build specifically really takes advantage of this aspect, which says after you hit enemies 15 times with your Werebear skills, your next Werebear skill will deal a multiplicative 50% more damage and stun enemies for 2 seconds. So why this is really interesting is because we're converting Boulder to a Werebear skill. So you may be thinking, okay, well, Boulder has to hit an enemy 15 times. But if you have 9 to, let's say 10, let's say you have 10 boulders out at once, and those 10 boulders hit the same enemy, so let's say a boss, once each, that's 10 hits. So if you run into a pack of mobs, you would actually be able to trigger this almost instantly every single time, and then your next boulder, if it snapshots, again, this is all theory, if it snapshots that next boulder for the duration of the Hurricane that it would be out for would do times 50% more damage, and that boulder would stun the enemies that it was hitting. So that's huge. That's a huge damage increase that you should be able to get fairly easily. And I think this becomes a extremely powerful aspect because it's not additive damage, it's multiplicative damage. So that's to me, this is probably one of the strongest single aspects for this build in damage amplification. And then we have Aspect of Retaliation, which is your core skills deal up to 40% increased damage based on your fortify amount. Since we have the vampiric power, and we have a couple other ways, like Vasili's Prayer giving us fortify, we should have this 40% up all the time, but this is an additive 40%. The other option you could put here is Umbral if you're having trouble with Spirit. So even if the playstyle is a little intensive for you Spirit-wise, you can always put Umbral on, and that every time you crowd control an enemy, you'll get 4 of the primary resource back if you have a perfect Umbral. And since everything that we literally are going to be using crowd controls, you're basically getting 4 ticks of Umbral every single thing you do, because Petrify will crowd control, Hurricane will crowd control, Poison Creeper will crowd control, Trample crowd controls. I think nope, even Storm Strike can immobilize, so that has a potential to crowd control, and then Boulder crowd controls every single time. So Umbral is really strong, but you could theoretically drop it if you play the style correctly and you get into the right rhythm. Again, you shouldn't need to use your basic skill to regenerate your spirit, and you shouldn't need Umbral, because we also have some other places that we're gaining spirit. But if you do find yourself struggling with spirit, you can always drop Retaliation and throw Umbral on to keep your spirit topped off. We're for the gems, we're going to take Sapphires for plus 12 critical strike damage to crowd control enemies. Again, we're crowd controlling with literally everything we do. We're going to take Rubies for maximum life, and then we're going to take Diamonds, or you can take Diamonds or Skulls. Again, kind of play with what you need. So if you need more armor, use Skulls. If you need more all res, use Diamonds. Or if you have a specific boss, so like if you're hard farming Duriel and that's the only thing you're doing, swap to Emeralds, right? Be smart. Like you kind of play around what you're doing. So if you know that you're going to go farm Duriel, repeatedly on repeat, just throw on 3 of the Emeralds and you should be good. All right. So when we get down to Spirit Boons, we're going to take 10% reduced damage from elites. We're going to take 5% increased critical strike chance, 30% critical strike damage, extend the duration of our ultimates by 25% so that Petrify lasts longer. And then we're going to take Obsidian Slam, so every 20th kill will cause our next Earth skill to overpower. Again, assuming that this works the way we all think it's going to work, this should snapshot, and then that boulder that goes out on that 20th kill should overpower every single hit that it does for the full duration of Hurricane. If that's the case, this is an extremely powerful node because Overpower now also has a times 50% multiplicative. So yes, this is super strong, assuming that it's going to snapshot the boulder that it goes out on, and then that boulder is just going to do a crap ton of damage while it's out in doing its rotations in Hurricane. All right, stats on gear. Because we have 4 uniques, there's not a lot of choice here. We're kind of playing around, getting a lot of the defensives that we're losing on pants in the Paragon board, and I'll go over that in just a second. On the chest piece, we're going to go with damage reduction from close enemies, maximum life, and total armor. Gloves, we're going to go with crit chance, attack speed, storm skill, cooldown reduction to bring down the cooldown of our Hurricane, and critical strike damage with earth skills, so just more damage on our boulders. Then we're going to take critical strike chance, damage to crowd controlled enemies for our rings, maximum life, and maximum spirit. The more spirit we can get, the more boulders we can throw, and the more that we don't lose spirit generation from overhealing in MMOs, right? You don't want to do that. That's not efficient. So in the same manner, if we can raise our spirits and Petrify, and our other sources of spirit generation can restore our spirit without going over the 100% mark, then we can ensure that we're getting the most efficiency out of it, so we can cast more boulders without losing out on spirit generation. We're going to duplicate these stats on both rings, so critical strike, damage to crowd controlled enemies, maximum life, and maximum spirit. Damage to crowd controlled enemies is crucial. and that's also going to be on our weapon. That's to activate the 40% multiplier on our Paragon legendary nodes. So make sure that if you had to prioritize any specific stat on these three, the 2 rings and the weapon, that it's damage to crowd controlled enemies, because that comes with a 40% multiplicative. Then for our weapon, we're going to go core skill damage, damage to crowd controlled enemies, damage to slowed enemies, and damage to stunned enemies, because Petrify will stun, Hurricane will slow, everything is crowd control, and then core skill damage is for our boulder. All right. So what's really, really crucial here is spirit generation, right? So we want to be throwing out boulders as much as humanly possible. We're going to gain spirit from a couple different locations. One, Petrify. Killing an enemy affected with Petrify grants 25 spirit. This is going to be the fastest way for us to get our spirit back, because basically we're going to stun out everybody, and then we're going to run through the pack of stunned enemies and kill them, hopefully instantly, and that's going to regenerate all of our spirit back. We can also at any point evade, and that's going to give us 50 spirit. Trample, because it also has an unstoppable component, and casting trample gives us 40 spirit. This will actually generate 90 spirit every time we cast trample, so we can use that. So if we ever get to 0 and our Petrify is on cooldown, we just trample and boom, we're right back to 90 more spirit. Poison Creeper is here to immobilize enemies, but also to poison them, so that we get the multiplicative critical strike damage from Envenom, which is super powerful. So if we get to like a really heavy elite pack or a lot of elites in one area, you just drop Poison Creeper, Petrify, and then you can evade in to proc your vulnerable, and then obviously your Hurricane and boulders, right? So then you have Hurricane, which is going to help us keep consistently applying vulnerable after we evade, but also put on the slow for our crowd control damage modifiers. Storm Strike. So Storm Strike is kind of malleable. You can either use Storm Strike if you like Storm Strike. That's going to give you a 15% damage reduction for 3 seconds. Has a chance to immobilize, and also has a chance to continually put on vulnerability. Or if you don't like being in melee with this build and constantly having to do melee hits, you can switch it to Wind Shear, which has its own benefits we'll go over in just a second. But you cannot go to Earth Spike, because since we're using Vasily's Prayer, your Earth skills are now Werebear skills. And if you go to Earth Spike, you won't have a trigger point to get out of Werebear form to keep consistently reducing that 30% resource cost reduction on Boulder. So your options are really... potentially you could do Claw, but there's really no reason to do Claw. But you could do Claw, Storm Strike, or Wind Shear. Primarily you want to choose between Wind Shear or Storm Strike. Jumping into the skill tree. So we just went over Storm Strike. Wind Shear does a couple different things. One, allows you a ranged attack, has 20% chance to apply vulnerability, and then you can take this and you can use it for each enemy hit, increases your movement speed by plus 5% for 5 seconds, up to 20%. So if you hit a really good Wind Shear, you could get a plus 20% burst of movement speed for 5 seconds. This helps with clear speeds, and is another good reason why you could go this route. Or again, you could do additional spirit, but really the move speed option would probably be the primary option. So every one that you would hit, you would just get a burst of movement speed, which allows you to just keep moving. Again, using this movement speed stacked with Moonrise would get you 35% movement speed for every 5 seconds to 10 seconds. So really, really strong alternative option. You just fit kind of your play style. Then, like my Earth and my build, you will have Wild Impulses, which is your core skills cost 9% more spirit, but deal multiplicative 15% increased damage. We're going to take Predatory Instinct 3 out of 3, which is going to give us an additive 6% increase to critical strike chance to close enemies. That's not a multiplicative increase, so this is actually very strong. And then we're going to also take 3 out of 3 and gain 9% damage reduction while we're in Werebear form. And since we're now a Werebear when we cast Boulder, this is going to be up pretty much all the time. We're then going to take Ancestral Fortitude, which gives us plus 15% all res. We're going to take Poison Creeper, of course, standard Poison Creeper nodes, so that we can proc Envenom. and get the multiplicative additional critical strike damage. Then we're going to take Elemental Exposure to allow our storm skills to help us proc vulnerability, but more importantly, it's to unlock Endless Tempest, which extends the duration of our Hurricane to close the gap on the cooldown and the duration of the spell itself. So we're going to bump that 8 seconds up to, again, roughly 11 to 12 seconds, and then we have on our gear the cooldown reduction for storm skills to bring the cooldown down from 20 seconds closer to like 18 seconds. So there should only be a gap of about 6 seconds of downtime, but we're going to cover that 6 seconds with symbiotic aspects. So when we go back over here, again, that 6 seconds, every time we trigger a skill, we're going to reduce Hurricane down 5 seconds, right? So if you get a good symbiotic aspect with a 5-second reduction, that basically means 2 procs of symbiotic, and we have our Hurricane up 100% of the time. So that's how that's going to operate. Hurricane is going to slow enemies, and then it's also going to help us keep vulnerability up. If you're playing hardcore or you find yourself needing more survivability, you can drop this and you can swap over to enemies affected by Hurricane, deal 20% less damage. Both of these are viable options. I would honestly say if you're struggling, definitely go over to Savage Hurricane. It'll help you considerably. All right, so Boulder 5 out of 5. When Boulder reaches the end of its path, enemies hit are slowed. If Boulder overpowers, enemies are stunned for 4 seconds. And then we're going to take Savage Boulder, which says Boulder's critical strike chance is increased by 3% each time it deals damage. So each time Boulder deals damage, it goes up plus 3% for its critical strike chance, allowing us to do more critical strikes. All right, we're going to take 3 out of 3 Crushing Earth. Earth skills deal multiplicative increased damage if they are slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. Petrify stuns, Hurricane slows, and Boulder knocks back. So this is pretty much a multiplicative 15% 100% of the time. Then we're going to take Safeguard, which critical strikes with Earth skills fortify you for 2% of your maximum life. Because we have the Savage Boulder and we have a bunch of additives for critical strike, this is just another way to keep our Fortify topped off as we're running through maps. And then Stone Guard, while you have Fortify for 50% of your maximum life, your Earth skills will deal multiplicative 12% increased damage. That's also going to be capped out. Then we're going to take Trample, Enhanced Trample, and then Casting Trample grants 40 Spirit. Again, the reason we're doing this is because every time we cast Trample and we gain the Unstoppable, that goes with our Pants, Tybalt's Will, which will give us 50 primary resource, and then Trample itself will give us 40 primary resource or 40 spirit, which means every time we cast Trample, we get 90 spirit. Petrify is going to be our kind of stun critical strike damage increase on bosses and enemies. And then obviously we have the duration extension, but more importantly, killing an enemy affected by Petrify grants 25 spirit. So we're going to take maximum spirit on gear, and we have some maximum spirit nodes in the Paragon board to kind of raise us beyond the 100% cap. This is just going to allow us to reach back up to that 100% cap very, very quickly so that we can continuously keep up bouldering. All right, Defiance. Nature Magic skills deal times 12% increased damage to elite, so just more elite damage. Then we're going to take Natural Disaster 3 out of 3. Your Earth skills deal multiplicative 12% more damage to vulnerable enemies, since we're going to be evading through enemies and proccing vulnerable. And then we have our Hurricane for vulnerable, and we have either Wind Shear or Storm Strike for vulnerable. We have many ways to apply vulnerable. This is just a nice 12% increase in damage. And then your Storm skills do 12% increased damage to stunned, immobilized, or knocked back enemies. Again, Petrify stuns and Boulder knocks back. So this is for our Storm skills going to be another way to generate more multiplicative damage. And we're going to take 1 point in Resonance because we just don't have enough to make this 3 out of 3, but basically it's a multiplicative 2% damage that gets tripled if we're weaving Storm Strike and Boulder. So since we are weaving Storm Strike and Boulder, that will give us a triple to that effect. So it'll be 6% increased damage. It's just 6% is really strong for 1 point. And then, of course, we're going to take Nature's Fury. So casting an Earth skill has 30% chance to trigger a free Storm skill of the same category, and vice versa. These free skills count as both Earth and Storm skills. So basically what this is saying is every time we cast Boulder and Boulder hits, there is a 30% chance that Boulder is going to proc Tornado or Lightning Storm, and that's going to be the benefit of Nature's Fury. Also, Nature's Fury is required for symbiotic aspect to work, so that's also a big key factor to the build. All right, Paragon board. So I'm actually kind of proud of this Paragon board. I put it together at 4 in the morning, and it is a 6 glyph, 5 legendary node board. You heard that right, 6 glyphs, 5 legendary node board. All glyphs are activated. So there's enough points to actually activate all 6 glyphs and to get all 5 legendary nodes and a couple important key rare nodes. So in the first board, the starting board, we're going to take Shapeshifter. The reason we're going to take Shapeshifter is Shapeshifting has a 20% chance to cause the skill's damage to critical strike. So since we're going to again be weaving Storm Strike and then casting Boulder after we shapeshift, it increases that to a 1 in 5 chance that boulder will critically strike. This is in my opinion, is a very powerful node for this build because it just means our boulders are going to be critically striking more often. And I want that to be something that's very early on to get critical strikes times 50% multiplier. All right, then we're going to move up our board into Heightened Malice. Heightened Malice, we're going to go through the glyph first. We're not going to rush to Heightened Malice's legendary node. We're just going to go through the glyph. And here we're going to put Territorial. Territorial is going to allow us to build up additive damage to close targets, and once we activate it, we're going to gain 15% damage reduction against close enemies because we are running actively into enemies in very close space with them. This is a very powerful defensive node, and since we don't have control of our pants, we don't have a lot of control over the damage reduction that comes on pants. This is a quick way to gain some of that damage reduction that gets lost. All right, then once we go through Heightened Malice, we're going to cut over to Inner Beast. Inner Beast, we are going to pick up the glyph and the legendary node. This is the legendary node that makes this all kind of function. So after shapeshifting, your spirit costs are reduced by 10% for 5 seconds, up to 30%. This is why you're going to weave Storm Strike and Boulder, so that we can always have that 30% cost reduction for 5 seconds. And then we're going to cut over to the glyph, and the glyph is going to be Fang and Claw. So this one, when it's activated while in werewolf or werebear form, close enemies take a multiplicative 12% increased damage from you. So this is a multiplicative 12% increase. And then of course, the nodes in here get amplified. All right, so then we're going to cut up. Next board is going to be Survival Instincts. Survival Instincts obviously has one of the strongest werebear legendary nodes in the entire Paragon board, which says while we're in werebear form, we're going to deal 1% increased damage up to 50% for every 1% difference in current life between you and the enemy. So if I'm at 100% life and the enemy's at 50% life, I am now doing times 50% more damage. So basically this is like a 50% range execute as long as you keep your life topped off. And this is very, very strong. So we want to grab this fairly early. That's why it's our third board. And then we're going to pick up the Werebear glyph for the Werebear Paragon board. And that's going to allow us to increase our werebear damage while we're in werebear form. Since our boulders are werebear skills, this is a additive damage increase. And then again, because we don't have a lot of defensive control in our gear, the additive bonus here is going to give us more damage reduction while we're in werebear form. And we also have that 9% on the skill tree in the passives to go along with this. So this is a nice, quality bump in damage reduction. And then you can honestly go one of two ways. I would honestly go right and then come back left later on. Right is going to allow you to pick up Ancestral Guidance, which is after spending 75 spirit, you will deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. Essentially, that's basically 2, maybe 3 boulders. Every 2 to 3 boulders that you cast, you will proc Ancestral Guidance, and that will give you that times 30% multiplier for 5 seconds for all additional boulders that you keep throwing and all your other damage that is happening at that time. Very powerful node with that times 30% multiplier. Very easy to kind of activate. Then you cut down, and we Hugh, and I kind of went back and forth on this, but he was right, he or she was right, and I rerouted through this board so that we can pick up the maximum spirit nodes and the spirit on kill nodes. So this will help again with spirit generation, with the petrify spirit on kill, but also with our maximum spirit to raise that threshold so we can fit more boulders in per 100% of spirit that we have. And we're also going to cut down here and do the same exact thing again. So we're going to pick up the maximum spirit, and in this case we're going to pick up some maximum life as well. So that's going to be the cut through here. And then we're going to hit the glyph here. This is going to be the Earth and Sky glyph. And the additional bonus once this one is activated is going to give our nature magic skills 10% increased multiplicative damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies, which we do both of those things. So this is just a nice multiplicative 10% damage increase when it's online. And then we're going to cut back into Heightened Malice so that we can pick up the legendary node in Heightened Malice. And that is going to allow us to do 45% multiplicative damage when 3 or more enemies are poisoned nearby. So this essentially comes online when we press Poison Creeper. So if we ever get in a situation where we want to, actually use Poison Creeper, again, we have, let's say, 3 or 4 elites in a pack of mobs that we pulled, then we just pop Poison Creeper and we get times 45% increased damage during that period of time. And then you come back once you picked up the Heightened Malice legendary node, come back and you can add in the Earth and Devastation board, and we're going to pick up the glyph and the legendary node here. Earth and Devastation legendary node says Earth skills deal times 10% increased critical strike damage, and then an increased by 25% of the total amount of your bonus damage to crowd control up to times 40%. What this is essentially saying is if you can get your damage to crowd control bonus up to 160%, then you will do a times 40% multiplier. And that's very confusing. It's a very confusing node, but essentially how we're getting there is when we go back to our skills, on our rings, as I mentioned before, and our weapon, we're taking damage to crowd controlled enemies. So this bonus damage to crowd controlled enemies that we're picking up here, we need to make sure that we get as close to or as high as we can to that 160% increased damage to crowd control enemies so that this Paragon node takes max effect, which is that times 40% multiplier. If we can do that, that's great, because that is a ton more damage that we will be doing the entire time. So the full time that we're doing anything, our boulders will get that increase in damage. And then for our last glyph, we're going to take Undaunted. So Undaunted will do an additive damage increase while we're fortified. We will always be fortified thanks to the vampiric powers and some of the other things that we touched on. But we will also, once it's activated, gain another 10% damage reduction the more fortify you have. So if we're at 100% fortify, we get the full 10% damage reduction. And that again is more defensives that we need, because we don't get a lot of those defenses like normal from our gear, thanks to our gear being a lot of uniques. So that is the full board. This again is a 6 glyph 5 legendary node board with a ton of multiplicative power. So we're getting multiplicative power from Heightened Malice. We're getting multiplicative power from Ancestral Guidance. We're getting multiplicative power from Survival Instincts. We're getting multiplicative power from Earth and Devastation. We're getting Spirit Cost Reduction from Inner Beast. So it's extremely strong altogether. For every boulder is getting these benefits. So again, if you imagine, if you have 9-10 boulders going at once, all 9 and 10 of those boulders are getting these multipliers. So very, 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 very strong. I'm probably going to wrap this up. This is probably way too long. It's probably need to be edited down. But essentially, I actually do think this is a better version of the Bouldercane Druid than my Earth and Might version, because I think we solved a lot more of the problems here. One, it's a lot more defensive with Petrify, keeping enemies stunned for a very long period of time. It's like 4 to 5 seconds stun duration. If that actually procs the unstoppable of enemies once it concludes, that's a benefit for us because knockback is our real enemy here with the boulders knocking back enemies. So if the enemies become unstoppable, then they don't get knocked back by your boulders, they take more boulder damage. So enemies becoming unstoppable is actually a benefit for this build, and Petrify really helps with that, as well as Poison Creeper, because Poison Creeper immobilizes, and then Hurricane because it slows. So the more enemies that we can make unstoppable, the better our boulder damage gets. So that's a huge benefit to this build. But all in all, I really like this build. I actually think if you can get this online, which is a tall ask when it requires 4 different uniques, and pretty much every aspect except for disobedience and retaliation are need to find, right? Because metamorphic is not a codex power, symbiotic is not a codex power, and raw might aspect is not a codex power. So you're going to have to do a lot of farming and a lot of hunting for good quality pieces of these aspects. But if you can do it and you spend the time on it, I actually think this version of Bouldercane is the truth. Like, I think this build is probably capable of doing almost everything in the game, largely again because you're not really relying on basic attacks to sustain your boulder output, right? You can use Trample, you can use Petrify, you can use your vampiric powers when you use Metamorphosis to gain Unstoppable. That's going to give you 50 spirit. There's just a ton of ways to generate spirit without spamming your basic attack to just consistently keep throwing boulders that is going to self-feed itself. So very, very powerful. Lot of multipliers. There's a ton of multipliers here. So with all the multiplayer reductions that, everybody's getting hit across the board in Season 2, this build is one where there's just multipliers coming out of the woodwork. Everywhere you look, there's multipliers on the damage. Things like Raw Might Aspect, which I don't think I've ever seen used by literally any build I've ever seen. This one is a times 50 multiplier, more damage. And it's, again, if you have 10 boulders out, you're going to be doing this quite a lot. And then, of course, you have all your critical strike damage multipliers. So give this a solid look. I think that a lot of people are probably sleeping on Bouldercane because, again, solving all these problems is not easy. And I once again want to say that this is not all me. This one wasn't all me. This wasn't something I came up by myself. Woody's Discord has a great set of channels for each individual class where very knowledgeable people come in and have competent chats back and forth. And this was just someone who had came in, saw my prior video, and asked me to take a look at their template. And then we kind of started going through it piece by piece, changing some things here or there. They have some perspectives that I don't have, but, I think all in all, we're at a much better place a couple hours into kind of reviewing this. So I think this build is the truth. I think that this would actually be functional, and I don't think there's a lot more adjustments that it needs. I honestly think this is probably what I would run with if I was going to use this as a seasonal build. You have to take a starter build, so something like Pulverized Druid or something to kind of lead into this is probably smart, because you are going to need to farm all the uniques to make this come online. But it's a great build. Hugh in the Discord, you did a fantastic job at the template for this. I'm glad we chatted and we kind of worked this out, because I think this is something serious. I think this is going to blow some people's minds if someone can acquire all the gear and really show it off. I think this is going to be a solid build, both on single target and in just AoE clear, because again, it doesn't rely. There's just so many ways to generate resource with this build. that I think it's going to be great, an all around great build for, you know, Uber's farming, potentially Uber Lilith. That's to be determined. There's not a lot of builds that aren't bugged that do Uber Lilith, but potentially it can do Uber Lilith. I don't think it's going to have a problem with Duriel. I think this build is extremely strong. So thanks guys, hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, the build guide will be in the description. And then of course I'm on Woody's Discord. If you want to come, just shoot me a ping, just at me in the Discord if you have any questions, and I'm happy to go and answer anything you guys have. All right, have a good one.